Join us for a two-part interview with Paul Gardner, a soft-spoken Wharton MBA with a long history in investing and leading companies. Securing investment for a venture is tough going. We interview Paul to hear from the inside what investors look for and what you need to be prepared with before you walk in the door.
I'm definitely one who's very focused on those milestones and having that team, really understand them and characterize them and present them so I can see the path forward and agree or disagree with what that's going to be.
Okay, let's get into this. The average small business requires about $10,000 to start, and some more ambitious businesses will initially bootstrap and then seek outside investment to help them grow. And this is where things get complicated. The media is rife with stories of early stage companies that raise millions in investment. And when you start looking for money, you'll often hear that the market's awash in cash. But a look below the surface shows that in fact, while millions of businesses start every year across English-speaking countries, only a tiny percentage succeed in raising funds. And even for those that do attract seed funding, according to a study by TechCrunch, only 40% of those go on to secure the next round of funding. So what goes on in the minds of investors? While business can come across as complex, analytical, and purely metrics-driven, the truth is that the human factor is even more important, especially when you're looking for an early-stage investment. Our interview today is with a shrewd, unassuming investor who's seen hundreds of opportunities cross his desk in the course of his investment career. We're going to find out just what he's looking for. So if you're looking for investment, give our interview with Paul Gardner a listen. So I would like to welcome my good friend, somebody I respect a great deal, Paul Gardner. Paul is someone with a long experience in business. And he's a co-founder of a business called Fieldless Farms, which we'll find out more about on a separate episode. But I've asked Paul to join us today, particularly to talk about investment because of his long history in the investment side. So I just want to say thank you, Paul. Welcome, and really do appreciate your time.
Good. Thanks, Robert. And it's good to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So, Paul, why don't you start as we always start these off? Who are you? Where do you come from? And what's the connection to business?
Sure. So it's good to be here, and like you, proud from Ottawa and Canadians. I think I've always been interested in technology, and so out of university, I got my first chance as working in actually a contract manufacturer on the shop floor in operations, and that would have been in the mid '90s, et cetera. So, that was just kind of the start of the Hotmails of the world and the early Yahoos and whatnot. And a lot of my spare time was just kind of digging into all these really interesting technologies and early stage ones and kind of playing with them and testing them. And then I'd go back to my, the old school mainframe ERP system that I would be punching data into a green and black screen. But it was always there in the back of my mind as an area of interest. And so after I did my MBA, I really focused myself of getting into venture and venture capital, which was still kind of early days in the late 1990s, especially here in Canada. And that's where I kind of got my first taste into investing, and it's stuck with me since.
So can you give us a bit of a background? You touched on it briefly, I guess, pre-MBA, but can you tell us a little bit about your experience working in or around entrepreneurially led organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been important to me, and I think a lesson, and it's all well documented, that it's really not about, in a lot of ways, what you're doing, but it's who you're doing it with, and finding not just like-minded people, but people where you feel like you can learn from and contribute. And so a lot of the jobs that I've done, whether it's on the investing side or as an operator, I've always tried to, put that in the forefront. It's really hard to do though, because, ideas are sexy and you get excited by them. And sometimes they take you down maybe the wrong rabbit hole per se. But if you take that step back, I've always tried to be driven by, who I'm working with more than just the problem or the challenge that we're trying to solve. And that's kind of guided me through most of the different jobs that I've done, and been a really big part of investing as well.
Now, I know that over the years, because we do know one another, over the years,
Yeah.
You have had that, I've always known you to have that strong investment side of you, but I also know that you've been quite hands-on and even taking on the management or CEO roles in some of these businesses. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a part of my career, I guess, when I left the venture fund that I was working at, and at that point, my partner and I were living in different cities, and so we decided to catch up for lost time and spend some time traveling together. And then when we came back, we kind of picked city over job in some ways, and then I kind of put out my shingle and started to get a lot of interest from, I guess, friends in the venture community that had challenges within their portfolio, and looking for me to help them in a workout or turnaround situation within a company. That kind of started about 7 or 8 years worth of going in and doing, workout and turnarounds, for lack of a better word, of venture investment or venture-backed companies, and in various roles: interim CFO, interim COO, interim CEO, from enterprise software to animation software, to ERP, and it really, kind of allowed me to do what I'm better at, which I would say taking an idea and building it from there, as opposed to the originator of the idea, and then applying just all of these lessons that I've learned from these high growth companies, and see, because they don't all apply to when you're trying to deal with a struggling situation, but sometimes infusing that, for lack of a better word, entrepreneurial spirit or energy or vitality into an organization that's really struggling and is a bit lost or wandering, kind of adds an angle that maybe otherwise isn't looked at and tried.
Interesting. So as somebody who's probably sat and had, God knows how many pitches made to you by businesses looking for investment, the first thing, what are the fundamentals that you look for when considering a business to invest in?
Well, so I do believe in the expression that it's all about the team and not just the idea. And so, spending a lot of time, or as much as you can, because sometimes as an angel investor, a seed investor, and especially nowadays when things are brought to you so quickly and you have to decide, within a day or 2 or 3, sometimes it's hard to get a great feel for the team. And that's when you have to really start to, rely a bit on maybe your network who brought the deal to you, and if they've worked with them before, or just seeing their background, and not just maybe the company they worked at, but their role and what part they maybe did to bring that company forward, or if it didn't go forward, understanding why. And so I do, follow that, that well-worn path of investing in the people, not the idea, no matter sometimes how exciting maybe that idea can be. And it's not to say that it's an all-truism, but it really does make a difference. And so I would say, out of my due diligence, probably 75% of it is getting comfortable with the people, and comfortable that, when stuff happens and they're knocked off their path, which happens to all of us, including us at Fieldless, that they can make the necessary decisions and be responsible in the direction that they're going to take the company to get it back on a growth path. And so it's really all about the people.
Do you know, you have kind of insinuated this a little bit, but I'm curious about that because obviously there's the issue of the market, there's the issue of the idea and how it would sit within the market, there's the idea of how how disruptive or innovative the idea is within the market and what its growth potential can be, and then there's talk of the human side of things. So why so much, and of course you're not the first person to talk about the importance of team, but why so much emphasis on team as opposed to some of those other elements, which we tend to think are, even more, I would even say potentially the even more rational elements than the kind of softer human side of things?
I guess it's because, and maybe it's because of the type of investor I am, and if I kind of had maybe more time or more capital or resources, and I could make, especially with angel investing, there are very significant, power law numbers at play. And if I could be on a pace of making 20 angel investments, 20 plus maybe a year, for example, then I think if I was in that type of, a way of doing things, then maybe you can start to just focus on those ideas, et cetera, that you think can really be the breakouts and give you the return that you need to it's more, not just the 1 in 10, but the 1 in 20 or the 1 in 30 that's going to make back all your money plus give you, an outsized return for the risk. But if you're maybe somebody like me who's kind of doing 5 to 7 in a year, then you have to kind of figure out how can I improve the odds. And when the way that I look at it, like there's only so many things I can control. I can't control the market. I can't control the buyer. I can't control, outside influences, macro influences that are going to impact this company. So the only thing that I can control when I put my dollars is kind of in the sense of making the bet on the team. Because at that point in time, at least I can kind of control that. Because everything else, the business plan per se in the model is all on this future. Like I'm betting on, on the idea. I'm not betting on whether they've got the product market fit. I'm not betting on whether they have a viable business model. It's just team plus idea. And so that's why I focus more on that team, because that I know for sure for my next 18 months, it's them that my dollars are going to be stuck to. And that's how I can hopefully better the odds. And if I could do the 20 investments a year, then I'd probably take that bigger portfolio approach and invest in a lot of great ideas per se, in hopes that one of those ideas will provide the outsized return. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. It's an interesting one because someone who has raised investment and has worked with companies who are looking to raise investment, it's the thing that I find confounding is, and why speaking to you I think is really important, and to other investors like you. Because, it seems like there's so much conflicting information out there. I've been told to make things longer, make them shorter, make them more punchy, make them less punchy, that it's about the team. It's not about the team. It's about the idea. Like, again, it's just it's so conflicting. And I guess the simple answer to that is, well, every investor is different. But for somebody that's looking to find investment, what you're trying to also understand is, what are the rules of the game I have to adhere to? So appreciate that, I'm certainly not trying to hold you accountable for every investor in the decision-making process, but more, what we're trying to do is paint a picture for people in terms of what to expect when you're going out there. When someone like you is looking at them, what are you hoping to find? So, but it is an immensely confounding process. And later in our discussion, we'll come back to the fact that you yourself had to go out and seek investment for Fieldless Farms. So we'll come to that in a moment. But staying on that human element, like what would you remember that somebody's going to be watching this thinking, I've got an idea, maybe I've already got a venture that's operating, and now I want to go to the next level and raise some investment. So don't downplay your knowledge, because a lot of people, it is a blank space. They've never necessarily had to do anything like this to go to a professional investor before. So when we talk about the human side that you're measuring, what is it that what are the ingredients of the people? What are the ingredients you're looking for in those people?
Well, it's definitely a confidence. It's definitely, confidence in their ability to execute, confidence in their understanding of the problem and that they want to solve in the market, et cetera. And that means them. I get that confidence by them just not, them getting the feeling that they've done their research, that they've done their work, because again, we're usually doing this before the product might be out there in a beta or in a small segment, et cetera. But it's really, feeling that they understand, what is happening, and they understand what levers that they can use to take my money and the other investors' money and reach the next milestone. And the to me, at least, is them understanding what those milestones is really important, because the round of funding that I'm going to put in is only going to get the company to a certain point. And then at that point, they're going to have to get a whole bunch of more money, most likely. And those investors are going to want to see what was generated out of the money that I put in. And it's no different with the farm. I mean, the first investor is invested in the idea, and the second investor is invested in taking that idea and getting something into the market and proving product market fit, maybe not sustainability yet or that next level. But, so when I'm listening to these, especially, first time entrepreneurs or ones that have a bit of a business, it's really it's giving me the confidence that they're just not winging it, for lack of a better word, or they didn't just get lucky, that they thought this through, that maybe it didn't kind of take the path that they originally thought, because it rarely does. So if sometimes you can kind of see through them if they're just trying to show you, all the good stuff and not the challenges. But then understanding how they got to that point and being, truthful and transparent about it. And then how they're going to take these funds and where it's going to get to next. And for me, and maybe it's a bit different than others, I'm definitely one who's very focused on those milestones, and having that team, really understand them and characterize them and present them, so I can see the path forward and agree or disagree with what that's going to be.
Is there? I'm curious. I'm sure. You in some way you've already answered this, but I'm really curious. Like at the end of looking at a pitch and doing your diligence as you described, as you're sitting there kind of scratching your head or smoking your pipe late at night, although I know you don't smoke, like is there something that pushes you over the edge in the direction of someone? Is there one thing that really stands out that ever comes to mind when you are making a decision on an investment?
Sure. So I would definitely say this, that I don't know if there's that one thing, but I would say that, my mind is made up to 85% off of that first meeting, or that first pitch. And then the last 15%, which might take way more time, is just validation. Like, and I guess I always sleep on it as well, because that's just what I do. Because you come out of it all as excited as they are, right? And you're all, pumped up, and this is the most amazing thing, et cetera, et cetera. But I always force myself to at least go to sleep sleep on it for one night, but it still doesn't change that first impression is huge, and there are definitely exceptions to it, but it is real and it is true, and especially nowadays with so many companies out there and so much money available, that it's, in my mind, I've definitely made that no. And, if I come out of that first meeting with a no, and I've been wrong many times before, I pretty much won't change my mind again. I won't flip that to a yes.
Right.
And if it's just a lukewarm maybe, that won't flip to a yes either. So there is a lot of pressure in on that meeting for the entrepreneur, and it still very likely there very likely can be a no, but you have to come out of it. I have to come out of it 85% thinking, this could definitely be a yes. And so, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, to compliment what you're saying, it's amazing. I've tended to work with kind of what I now think of as the higher performing entrepreneurs. But I work with an accelerated program where I do business coaching, and it's really interesting to see how rudimentary some people's plans are, how they're just not, they don't seem driven, they don't seem focused, they don't seem to have enough of an understanding of the market. They haven't done the groundwork. They haven't uncovered every stone. The fundamentals of their business and their value proposition and what they think their market is going to need for them to conquer it, it just doesn't exist, in so many cases. And it's funny because I just would have thought that people, if they were going to show up and say that they're in business, that they would have worked harder. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what do you typically see when you're being pitched?
I would agree with that, and that's where I kind of, I guess I mentioned it briefly before. That's where I personally, where I think a lot of those check boxes get ticked off, because especially today, pitches have become, I guess, less, they become snazzier. It's more about the graphics, less about the words. People are designing them for 15 minutes, and then having the conversation, as opposed to, it maybe in the past it was a 30 page slide deck in which I would interrupt at slide 5 and never get to the end. But they kind of did that prep work, and almost the other slides end up like the appendix. But the one thing that I really found that gives me confidence that they really do understand, the market and where this company is going, is showing kind of that milestone chart. It's like, this is our path forward. These are the inflection points, because you just can't pick those out of the air per se, and then they can map to the hockey stick and all of that. But it's people who kind of have that type of view, and they might not end up following that path, but at least they've kind of put themselves down a route, and they can justify it in conversation with me, in debate. Then that to me is the really important part, and that's the part that is also usually the one that's missing the most. It's a different slide than showing your market, your product, your team, even the financials. It's layering on everything that needs to be done to reach certain points in that financial type of slide or user slide or something like that. To me, that's where, if they really have put that down on paper in a way that's digestible, then that gives me a lot more confidence than me having to tease it out, which is normally the case when I'm listening to a pitch.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because you can actually see that they've had to have gone through the exercise of imagining their way forward and really saying, I'm going to put your funds to good use. And I've already seen the road ahead, rather than kind of leaving stuff to chance. It's interesting. What about the financials? How often, in your experience, are the financials that you see in a pitch accurately reflected in performance after you've invested?
I don't know if they're accurate, and we used to joke that what you would normally do is, double the expenses and take the square root to the revenue for what the actuals will end up being. But it's more that, when you're asking questions about them, that they know where their numbers came from. And so they understand what it means to go from, $10,000 of MRR to, $75,000 of MRR, or $150,000. Like, at least just to understand, just the numbers for me are to give me comfort that they understand how the model was built, and that they understand the levers that they have, that they understand, the trade-offs, if it's maybe not a pure venture business, the trade-offs between, growth and profitability, for example, that they understand what it means to acquire a customer, and, the timelines to make that customer profitable. And in so many, because there's so much information out there today, there is so many models that at least they can start at to emulate, and to help connect those dots to show, so that they're at least within a range, a wheelhouse of what is possible, is important, as opposed to what maybe the actual number might be. That they understand that if I want this amount of sales, and I need to generate these many leads, or the cost to develop this, taking this from beta into a full production environment, or supporting my monthly AWS charges or whatnot, are reasonable. So it's really, I guess it's really about the assumptions as opposed to the numbers, which I think is most important in the model. And that means they have to really know what is behind the actual numbers in the conversation. And it's really easy, unfortunately, to trip people up on it.
I hope you enjoyed this first part of our interview with Paul Gardner, private equity investor and a director of Fieldless Farms. Click on the second part of our interview to hear Paul's advice on the different funding rounds and what it takes to get ready to begin your hunt for funding.